The ship tore a clean gash through the mist over the Amazon, its hull humming like a tuning fork struck too hard. Commander Ixthel of the Vetraxi Exploratory Corps squinted through the viewport, adjusting for the thick green tide that stretched endlessly below. To the Vetraxi, Earth's rainforests were just another catalogued biosphere, ripe for study and hopefully exploitation. Yet warnings had trickled through the galactic trade networks. Avoid Earth's jungles. Something there devours expeditions whole. Ixthel dismissed the rumors as superstition. He had a mission, a team, and the kind of arrogance that came from surviving a dozen uncharted worlds. His second in command, a wiry being named Prixil, hovered to his left, tapping coordinates into the nav console. "The landing zone is clear," Prixil said. "Atmospheric readings are within tolerances." Ixthel nodded and initiated descent. On the ground, the rainforest swallowed them immediately. Trees towered overhead, dripping vines and leaves the size of small hovercrafts. Insects buzzed so loudly the air itself seemed to vibrate. The Vetraxi team fanned out, scanners glowing dull green as they took samples and mapped the terrain. Unbeknownst to them, a human was already watching. Samuel Strayer adjusted the brim of his filthy cap, squinting through binoculars so battered they looked more rust than glass. He crouched atop a fallen kapok tree, blending into the tangled green around him. A machete was strapped to his thigh, and a battered pack weighed down his shoulders. Samuel had been in the rainforest for over a year, a survivalist by necessity rather than choice. A government research trip had gone sideways, leaving him stranded with little more than his wits and whatever he could scavenge. "Aliens," Samuel muttered under his breath, lowering the binoculars. "Fantastic." One of the aliens, lanky, with shimmering blue skin and long, flexible limbs, stepped into a patch of sunlight. Samuel watched as it kneeled to collect soil samples, its movements almost delicate. Samuel's stomach growled. He hadn't eaten anything substantial in 2 days, and now extraterrestrial tourists were trampling his hunting grounds. He sighed, weighing his options. Then a sharp crack split the air. The alien collecting soil jerked upright. Its scanner sparked once, then died. The others froze, heads swiveling. Samuel didn't move. He knew that sound, a branch snapping under something heavy. Something hunting. Ixthel barked orders in his native tongue, deploying a perimeter shield. The device hummed, an invisible dome flickering to life around their camp. They relaxed slightly, reassured by their technology. Samuel shook his head. "You poor idiots." The rainforest didn't care about shields. The rainforest had patience. Night fell hard and fast, the way it always did here. The Vetraxi huddled close to their ship, the darkness pressing in like a physical thing. Strange calls echoed through the trees' screeches, howls, low, guttural growls that made even Prixil's skin pucker. Samuel built a fire a few hundred yards away, carefully shielded by a ring of stones to keep the light low. He roasted a handful of scavenged beetles, chewing slowly while keeping one eye on the alien camp. That was when he saw it. A shape, massive and shaggy, moved between the trees near the Vetraxi. It wasn't a jaguar. It wasn't any animal Samuel recognized. It moved like it owned the place, its bulk somehow silent despite its size. One of the aliens, a scout named Velrix, wandered too far from the shield perimeter. Samuel hissed through his teeth. "Don't do it." Velrix's scanner beeped weakly as he bent over a strange flower, oblivious to the creeping shadow behind him. Samuel stood, muscles tense, debating whether to intervene. He knew stepping in could mean death, but he also knew what was coming. The creature struck without warning. A blur of gray and brown, it hit Velrix with enough force to send him flying into a tree. The Vetraxi's body crumpled and lay still. The camp erupted in chaos. Ixthel screamed orders. Energy weapons lit up the night. Beams sliced the undergrowth, setting small fires, but the creature was already gone, melting back into the jungle. Samuel watched grimly. He knew better than to think it was over. The rainforest never attacked just once. The next morning, the Vetraxi discovered Velrix's body was missing. No blood, no tracks, just an empty patch of earth where he had fallen. "Commander," Prixil said, voice tight, "recommend immediate extraction." Ixthel shook his head. "No, we complete the mission. We owe it to Velrix." Samuel snorted, spitting a beetle wing into the dirt. You owe him a funeral." A heavy rain began to fall, drumming on the canopy like distant artillery. Visibility dropped to near zero. The Vetraxi adjusted their gear and pressed deeper into the forest. Samuel followed. Hours passed. The deeper they went, the worse it got. Their instruments short-circuited. Their maps became useless. Even their internal compasses spun wildly. The rainforest seemed to shift around them, rearranging itself when they weren't looking. Samuel caught glimpses of the creature, sometimes 2 or 3 of them keeping pace in the shadows. He moved carefully, making sure to leave misleading tracks and false trails. If the aliens were going to survive, he needed to lead whatever was out there away from them, or so he thought. At a muddy ravine, disaster struck. Prixil slipped first, his foot catching on a root slick with rain. He tumbled down the embankment, landing with a sickening crack. He screamed, clutching his leg. Ixtal slid down after him, cursing in his native tongue. Samuel grimaced. From the way Prixil's leg bent, it was broken. Badly, Ixtal knelt beside him, scanning the injury. Fracture confirmed. Compound. Prixil's breathing was ragged, his skin dull with pain. Samuel knew they needed a splint fast. He scanned the area, spotting a branch thick enough to work. Moving carefully, he approached. Ixtal saw him immediately and drew his weapon. Samuel raised both hands. "Easy." "I'm not here to hurt you," Ixtal spoke, his translator spitting out garbled English. "Identify, purpose. Name's Samuel Strayer. I'm here because you're about to get yourselves killed." Ixtal hesitated, then lowered his weapon slightly. "Assist." Samuel nodded and knelt by Prixil. "Looks like a clean break through the tibia," Samuel said, inspecting the leg gently. "But we need to stabilize it before he goes into shock." He tore strips from his own shirt, fashioning a makeshift splint with the branch. Prixil moaned but stayed conscious. Samuel worked fast, his hands steady despite the rain, and the looming feeling of being watched. When he finished, he looked up. "We need to move. Now." Ixtal hesitated again, but finally nodded. Samuel led them along a hidden game trail he had found months ago, moving steadily despite the rain. Prixil limped heavily between them, supported by Ixtal. They didn't make it far. From the trees ahead, 3 of the creatures emerged. They were massive, like a cross between a bear and a snake, with thick, matted fur and eyes that glowed faintly green in the dim light. Samuel cursed under his breath. Ixtal raised his weapon. The creatures charged. Samuel didn't wait. He grabbed Ixtal's arm and yanked him sideways, dragging Prixil with them into the underbrush. The creatures barreled past, missing them by inches, but it was clear they were hunting by scent, not sight. Samuel pulled a small metal canister from his belt and tossed it into the path. It exploded with a loud bang and a cloud of acrid smoke. The creatures roared in frustration, clawing at the ground. "Move," Samuel shouted, pushing the Vetraxi ahead of him. They ran, crashing through the undergrowth, thorns tearing at their clothes and skin. Prixil stumbled, nearly falling, but Samuel caught him. Finally, they reached a narrow river, swollen from the rain. Samuel didn't hesitate. He plunged into the water, dragging Prixil with him. Ixtal followed. The current was brutal, ripping at them, but it carried them away from the creatures. When they finally crawled onto the far bank, exhausted and shivering, Samuel collapsed onto his back, gasping for air. Ixtal struggled to his feet, checking Prixil's splint. It had held, but the alien was dangerously weak. His face pale and drawn, Samuel sat up slowly. His ribs ached from the river's pounding. "You need to call your ship. Get out of here." Ixtal shook his head. "Signal blocked." Samuel laughed bitterly. "Of course it is. Welcome to the Amazon." He pulled a battered radio from his pack. "Might be able to boost your signal if we find high ground." Ixtal nodded grimly. Together, they staggered into the trees, unaware that the worst was yet to come. The rain had slackened into a misty drizzle by the time they reached a ridge, the muddy slope forcing them to crawl on all fours. Samuel's knees were scraped raw, his hands numb from gripping slick roots. Prixil sagged between them, barely conscious, his body trembling from more than just cold. At the crest, Samuel stood and wiped a sleeve across his face. The view was a thick wall of green and steam, but the elevation gave him hope. He knelt, pulling the battered radio from his pack again, fiddling with the antenna until it stood upright like a broken reed. Ixtal crouched beside him, scanning the treetops. Atmospheric interference low. Transmission possible. Samuel grunted, turning a tiny dial with care. If their comms are anything like ours used to be, it'll take a miracle to punch through. Prixil made a low sound, somewhere between a groan and a question. Samuel glanced at him, noting the dark patches creeping up the alien's leg. Infection was setting in fast. We need antibiotics, Samuel muttered, half to himself. Ixthel adjusted the frequency on his wrist device, synchronizing it with Samuel's radio. Medical supplies on ship limited. Not for species cross-use. That's a problem for another hour, Samuel said. First, we get you help. The radio crackled weakly. Static hissed in bursts. Samuel twisted knobs, fine-tuning by ear. The rainforest seemed to lean closer, the usual hum of insects and distant animal cries muted, expectant. A sharp buzz snapped through the static. Then silence. Samuel exhaled slowly. Better than nothing. He pressed the transmit button. Anyone out there? This is Strayer, coordinates relative to, he paused, realizing the aliens wouldn't recognize Earth's grid system. High ridge, northwest quadrant, river bend below, emergency evac needed. 2 injured, repeat, 2 injured. He let go, waited, nothing but the soft hiss of rain on leaves. Ixthel stared at the radio, his expression tight. Samuel didn't need a translator to catch the meaning. Minutes dragged by. Prixil's breathing grew shallower, his chest hitching irregularly. Samuel pressed the button again. Coordinates attached, signal repeating. Urgent. This time, a faint beep acknowledged the transmission. A response was still uncertain, but at least someone or something had heard. Now we wait, Samuel said grimly. Ixthel shifted awkwardly. Prixil's condition unstable. Need immediate intervention. Samuel blew out a breath. Yeah, I know. He rummaged through his pack, pulling out a small metal box sealed with duct tape. Inside were the last of his supplies. A few bandages, a broken thermometer, and a single half-empty vial of broad-spectrum antibiotics he'd salvaged months ago. This isn't calibrated for your biology, Samuel warned, holding up the vial. But it's either this or watch your friend die. Ixthel hesitated a heartbeat, then gave a curt nod. Samuel drew up a small dose into a syringe, wiping the needle with a shredded bit of clean cloth. He found a vein in Prixil's upper arm, easier said than done, given the alien's translucent, oddly elastic skin, and injected the medicine with steady hands. Prixil flinched, but didn't wake. They sat in silence after that, the rain misting down around them like cold breath. Samuel watched the trees, every rustle and whisper raising the hair on his arms. Hours passed, the sky dimming toward evening. Samuel checked Prixil's splint, noting the swelling. We'll have to cut the boot off to keep circulation, he said. Proceed, Ixthel replied, his gaze sweeping the tree line. Using the serrated edge of his knife, Samuel worked carefully, slicing through the alien material. It was tougher than leather but eventually peeled away, revealing a foot that was unnervingly similar to a human's, save for the bluish tint and 3 thick toes. The skin around the break was mottled. Angry-looking, Samuel frowned. Tissues dying. We gotta move faster. Ixthel didn't respond, but his jaw clenched visibly. As darkness deepened, the forest sounds changed. The daytime insects fell silent, replaced by long, drawn-out calls that sounded almost like speech if speech were made by something with too many teeth. Samuel felt the air shift, a sticky, suffocating pressure settling over the ridge. Without warning, the underbrush below exploded in movement. Samuel yanked his machete free, heart hammering. Shapes darted between the trees smaller than the massive beasts from before, but fast. Dozens of them. Their bodies were low and sinuous, with too many legs and reflective eyes that caught what little light remained. The first one broke from the tree line, bounding up the slope with terrifying speed. Ixthel raised his weapon and fired. A sharp, concussive blast echoed, sending the creature tumbling back with a smoking hole through its thorax. Samuel didn't wait. He hacked at the undergrowth, clearing a crude barrier of thorny vines around their position. It wouldn't stop them, but it might slow them down. More creatures surged forward, undeterred by the fallen one. Samuel glanced at Ixthel. How many shots you got? Energy reserves minimal. 5 discharges remaining. Terrific, Samuel muttered. He crouched beside Prixil, who had begun to stir weakly. "Hey buddy, stay with us." Bad time to check out. Prixil's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Samuel stood, machete ready. The creatures circled them now, probing the defenses. One slashed at the vine barrier, recoiling when the thorns tore into its hide. They were testing weaknesses. Learning. "Looks like they're smarter than they look," Samuel said grimly. Another blast from Ixthal's weapon dropped a second creature, but the rest barely hesitated. Samuel spotted a narrow cleft in the ridge to their left, barely wide enough for a body to slip through. It descended sharply into shadow, but it was a way out. He tapped Ixthal's arm, nodding toward it. "We make for that gap. Carry Prixil." Ixthal nodded once, grim determination in every line of his body. Samuel slashed a path toward the cleft, moving fast. Ixthal hoisted Prixil over his shoulder awkwardly, the injured alien groaning faintly. The creatures shrieked in unison and surged forward. It became a sprint. Samuel hacked at reaching limbs, the machete biting deep. Hot, foul-smelling blood sprayed his arms, making the grip slippery. Ixthal fired twice more, each shot punching massive holes in their pursuers. They reached the cleft just as the creatures closed the distance. Samuel squeezed through first, sliding down a slope of loose stones. Ixthal followed, half carrying, half dragging Prixil. The creatures slammed into the walls of the gap, too large to follow easily. Frustrated, they clawed at the stone, sending pebbles rattling down. Samuel didn't stop to admire their luck. He led the way downward, the narrow canyon twisting and dropping sharply. The air grew cooler, heavier. After what felt like hours, the gap widened into a cavern mouth, hidden behind thick curtains of moss. They stumbled inside, collapsing against the rough stone walls. Samuel's whole body shook from adrenaline and exertion. For a long minute, none of them moved. Then Samuel lit a small flare from his pack, casting a dim orange glow across the cavern. The space was enormous, the ceiling lost in darkness. Strange, bulbous fungi clung to the walls, pulsing faintly. Prixil stirred again, his voice a cracked whisper. "Ship." Samuel knelt beside him. "Signals out there, we just have to hang on." Ixthal scanned the cavern, his posture tense. "Unknown habitat, potential threats." "No kidding," Samuel said, standing carefully. He peeled off his wet jacket, wringing it out. His hands were raw, the knuckles split and bleeding. He flexed them experimentally, wincing. "We need shelter inside the shelter," he said. "Somewhere those things can't just waltz in." Ixthal nodded, already moving to scout the interior. Samuel busied himself building a fire near the mouth of a side tunnel, using dry moss and bits of fungus. The flare wouldn't last long, and they needed light. As the fire caught, casting flickering shadows, Samuel leaned against the wall, exhaustion pulling at his bones. Ixthal returned, his face unreadable. Found defensible alcove, 50 meters deeper, narrow access. Samuel forced himself upright. "Good, we move now." They lifted Prixil carefully, staggering deeper into the cavern. Behind them, faint scratching sounds echoed from the ridge above, a reminder that the forest was never truly empty. Samuel didn't look back. He didn't have to. They weren't out of danger, yet not by a long shot. The alcove was barely tall enough for Samuel to stand upright. Its floor sloped unevenly, forcing them to arrange Prixil carefully against the back wall, where he would be least disturbed. The cavern breathed with a faint draft, carrying earthy scents of damp stone and decaying moss. Samuel knelt by the fire pit, feeding it bits of dry fungus until the flames steadied into a low, steady burn. Prixil muttered something under his breath, his eyes fluttering open for a moment before sliding closed again. "He's running a fever," Samuel said, pressing his palm lightly to Prixil's forehead. "The infection's not slowing down." Ixthal crouched opposite him, setting down a small device that emitted a soft chime. "Emergency beacon active." Estimated retrieval window, 4 hours. Samuel grunted, shifting his weight to ease the pressure off his bruised hip. "Let's hope your friends aren't sightseeing." Ixthal adjusted the angle of the beacon slightly. Vetraxi prioritize extraction of endangered personnel. "Delay unlikely." "That's comforting," Samuel said, rolling his sore shoulder. Assuming whatever's out there doesn't get curious first, Ixthal studied him for a long moment. "You possess uncommon knowledge of hazardous environments, formal military training." Samuel shook his head. Field scientist, specialized in survival ecology, spent 3 years prepping for expeditions into uncharted biome. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Didn't think I'd end up trapped in one. Your adaptability exceeds projections for human baseline capabilities. Samuel shrugged. Adapt or die. That's not science, that's Tuesday. A low rumble of thunder vibrated through the stone walls, distant but ominous. The fire flickered in the shifting air currents, casting their shadows long and thin against the rock. Pryxil stirred again, his breathing ragged. Samuel leaned closer, examining the alien's injured leg. The swelling had worsened, and the skin around the splint had turned an ugly shade of gray-blue. He pulled out the last clean bandage from his pack and carefully began to rewrap the wound, working with a gentleness that made Ixthel watch him with something like disbelief. You accept contamination risk without hesitation, Ixthel said. Samuel didn't look up. He's breathing. That's good enough for me. He secured the bandage with a strip of woven vine, then sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. His stomach growled, but there was nothing left in his pack to eat. Are human beings uniformly willing to endanger themselves for non-kin? Ixthel asked, his tone genuinely curious. Samuel leaned his head against the cool stone behind him. Not uniformly, but you spend enough time alone out here, you realize survival's not just about who's strongest. It's who you drag with you. Ixthel tilted his head, processing that. Statistical models suggest prioritization of self-preservation. Yeah, well, statistics don't bleed out in the mud. Outside the alcove, faint scratching sounds whispered along the cavern walls. Samuel stiffened, motioning for silence. He doused the fire carefully, letting darkness reclaim the space. They waited, breath held, as something heavy padded past the alcove entrance, unseen but close enough that Samuel could smell its musky, metallic scent. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours before the shuffling faded away. Samuel exhaled slowly. They're still tracking us. Persistence level exceeds known terrestrial predators, Ixthel said under his breath. Samuel rubbed his face. Welcome to Earth. Everything's either evolving fast or it's already smarter than you. Pryxil gave a low, pained whimper. Samuel leaned over him, checking his pulse. It was fast and thready, his skin clammy. His kidneys might be failing, Samuel said, voice low. If we don't get him fluid soon, he's not gonna make it. Ixthel opened a compartment on his belt and extracted a small capsule, cracking it open to reveal a thin membrane filled with clear liquid. He handed it to Samuel without a word. Samuel blinked at it. You had Roman IV fluid this whole time, formulated for Vetraxy biochemistry, potentially incompatible with human physiology. Samuel snorted. Good thing I'm not the one drinking it. He found a vein in Pryxil's wrist, tapping gently until it surfaced, then slid a hollow reed from his kit into it. The reed wasn't meant for this, but it would do. Samuel squeezed the liquid slowly into the alien's bloodstream, watching for any immediate reaction. Pryxil twitched, but otherwise remained still. Samuel sat back, flexing his stiff fingers. Now we wait. Again, the cavern grew colder as the night deepened. Samuel and Ixthel sat in silence, conserving energy, while the beacon pulsed faintly every few minutes. Samuel's eyelids drooped, but he forced himself awake each time they fluttered closed. Around what he guessed must have been early morning, a faint humming filled the air. Samuel tensed, reaching for his machete. Ixthel stood abruptly, scanning the ceiling. Extraction vessel entering atmosphere. A narrow beam of light cut through the cavern entrance, scanning methodically. Samuel shielded his eyes, watching as a sleek, silver drone floated into view. It projected a holographic map onto the wall, marking the safest path back to the surface. Ixthel pointed. We follow. Samuel shouldered his pack, lifting Pryxil carefully. The alien weighed less than Samuel expected, his frame fragile under the heavy armor. Step by step, they climbed. The path marked by the drone wound sharply upward, through narrow fissures and across slick ledges where one misstep would have meant a fatal fall. Samuel's muscles burned, his breath coming in shallow gasps, but he didn't falter. Up ahead, the exit loomed a jagged tear in the rock face, pale morning light spilling through. As they neared the opening, a low growl echoed from behind them. Samuel didn't turn. He didn't have to. He could feel the presence closing in, the vibration of massive paws striking stone. "Go," he shouted. Ixtal surged forward, clearing the last ledge and hauling Prixil through the gap. Samuel scrambled after, feeling the hot breath of something vast and furious brush the back of his neck. He rolled clear just as a massive clawed paw swiped at the entrance, gouging deep furrows into the stone. Outside, a ship hovered low over a clearing, its hull rippling with iridescent colors. A ramp extended down and several armored figures rushed forward, weapons raised. Samuel stumbled toward them, still carrying Prixil. The aliens formed a defensive line between the humans and the cavern mouth. A series of sharp clicks and whistles passed between them, rapid tactical communication. Samuel couldn't begin to follow. A heavy net shot from one of the aliens, sealing the cavern entrance just as the beast inside lunged forward. It struck the barrier with a roar, but the net held, crackling with energy. Samuel sagged to his knees, setting Prixil gently down. Medics in sleek gray suits swarmed around them. One scanned Prixil, while another lifted Samuel's chin, checking his pupils. "I'm fine," Samuel rasped. "Help him first." The medic nodded, injecting Prixil with something that made his color improve almost immediately. They lifted the injured alien onto a floating gurney and whisked him aboard the ship. Ixtal approached Samuel, his posture rigid. "You have saved 2 Vetraxi lives under hostile conditions," he said. "Such actions warrant formal recognition." Samuel wiped blood and dirt from his face. "Save the medals. Just get off my planet before something worse shows up." Ixtal's mandibles clicked once, a gesture Samuel had not seen before. Respect, maybe, or gratitude. As the ship rose into the sky, Samuel watched the rainforest disappear beneath them. From above, it looked calm, serene even. A thick green ocean stretching to the horizon, but he knew better. Beneath that canopy, Earth's oldest laws still ruled. Adapt, survive, endure. Ixtal turned to him as the ship cleared the atmosphere. "The Vetraxi Council will designate Earth's rainforests as Class 5 no-entry zones. No further expeditions authorized." Samuel leaned back against the bulkhead, closing his swollen eyes. Smart move. The ship accelerated into the dark, leaving Earth behind. And for the first time in a long while, Samuel allowed himself to sleep, knowing the forest would guard its secrets a little longer.